Malcolm says the American quote-unquote leader's most critical problem is lack of imagination. His strategies are limited to only that which is approved by the white man. He also writes, quote, the first thing the American power structure doesn't want any Negro to start is thinking internationally, end quote. Malcolm said the single worst mistake of the American black organizations and their leaders is that they failed to establish direct brotherhood lines of communications between independent nations of Africa and the American black people. Malcolm discussed with Prince Faisal about how the Nation of Islam was misled. Malcolm learned about English translations about Islam and said there is no excuse for ignorance, and there is no reason for sincere people to allow themselves to be misled. On April 30th, 1964, Malcolm left Mecca. He's 38 years old at this time. While walking around Lebanon, observing the culture, he writes, quote, it showed me how any country's moral strength its moral weakness is quickly measurable by the street attire and attitude of its women, especially its young women, end quote. Malcolm felt that there should be a balance between spiritual and material values. After his Beirut speech, Malcolm felt that American Negro audiences never accepted him as he was accepted by the less inhibited, more down-to-earth Africans. Okay. I think he meant African audience. African, I don't know, probably American. Okay. Malcolm traveled to Nigeria to speak at Lagos. There he says, quote, I urge that Africa's independent nations need to see the necessity of helping to bring the Afro-Americans' case before the United Nations, end quote. Malcolm felt that it was time for all Afro-Americans to join the world's Pan-Africanists. He writes, quote, we Afro-Americans badly need to return to Africa and to develop a working unity in the framework of Pan-Africanism, end quote. Malcolm mentions the fanatic expression of Africans in regard to politics. Malcolm was given the name Omowale, which means the son who has come home, end quote. While speaking to the Nigerian officials, told Malcolm, quote, something, how skillfully the U.S. Information Agency sought to spread among Africans the impression that American Negroes were steadily advancing and the race problem will soon be solved, end quote. Malcolm said, quote, the world's course will change the day the African heritage people come together as brothers, end quote. He never heard that kind of global thinking from any black man in America. From Lagos, Nigeria, Malcolm flew to Accra, Ghana. Malcolm writes, quote, I think that nowhere in the black continent's wealth and the natural beauty of its people richer than in Ghana, which is so proudly the very fountainhead of Pan-Africanism, end quote. Malcolm didn't like seeing American whites in Africa discussing untapped wealth. Malcolm says, quote, right there at my Ghanaian breakfast table was where I made up my mind that as long as I was in Africa, every time I opened my mouth, I was going to make things hot for the white man, grinning through his teeth, wanting to exploit Africa again. It had been her human wealth the last time. Now he wanted Africa's mineral wealth, end quote. Malcolm didn't like the conflict. Malcolm didn't like how this conflicted with his convictions of brotherhood. Malcolm didn't like this conflicted with his convictions of brotherhood gained in the Holy Land. Malcolm didn't like that this conflicted with his convictions of brotherhood gained in the Holy Land. So he started to revert from his universal unity of the Holy Land. Malcolm says, quote, the Muslims of the white complexion who had changed my opinion were men who had showed me that they practiced genuine brotherhood, end quote. And he felt like an American white man with genuine brotherhood for a black man was hard to find. Malcolm was well known in Ghana. He says, quote, I simply couldn't believe this kind of reception 5,000 miles from America, end quote. Malcolm says, quote, I was plied with questions by the eagerly interested black expatriates from America who had returned to Mother Africa, end quote. In Ghana, Malcolm,